Perfect. Good morning, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. I can see everyone coming in. Brilliant. I hope you've been having a good Bristol Tech Festival week and you've made it to Friday and you're still here, which is great. If you are, have you been to the festival? Let us know what other events you've been to in the chat. I'd be very interested. I would also love to know what areas of the business you guys work in. So are you all UX designers or marketing or product or tech or none of the above? I'm just interested to find out a bit more about UX design. I would really like to know. So do say hello in the chat. I'm going to try and look at it through the course of the talk, just so I can try and answer any questions as and when they come up. But if I miss them, then I will do some Q&A at the end. So let me know. Perfect. We see a few more people coming in. Nobody's saying hello in the chat, but I can see your names. So I'm going to start calling people out. Hi, Dan. I can see you from Estrella Ventures. Good to see you. Who else have we got? Lots of new names as well, which is great. Tim, good to see you as well. Perfect. Okay, well, enough naming and shaming. I'm going to get on with the talk, given that's why you're all here. And oh, Isabel's given us a wave. Thank you. So today I am going to be talking about UX design, and particularly a bit of the misconceptions around what UX design is, why I think it's way more than just wireframing, and particularly how it can add a lot of long-term value to organizations and businesses. So before we kick off for proper, doing a lot of others, just so you know who I am for all the new people joining the call, I'm Harry and I run an agency called Unfold here in Bristol. And we are a UX-led technology agency. So we believe that tech has the power to be incredibly transformative and valuable and make the world a better place. But often it's let down by poor user experience. And we're really on a mission to try and change that by making products as easy to use as possible and as valuable as they can be. And we do that across websites, web applications, that type of thing. Which is why I'm so excited to be talking about UX as part of Bristol Tech Festival. Oh, I think we've already got a question. Alice, my marketing manager, is literally sat opposite me, waving her hand, going, people are, oh, the chat's disabled. Classic, right, okay. How do we fix that? This is very 2020, isn't it, doing a webinar instead of an in-person event, but we just wanted to make sure as many people could join as possible. Chat. I don't know why that's been disabled, but I can see people have been putting stuff into the Q&A. So do that. Alice is going to be doing some quick Googling around how to enable the chat, and we'll see if we can fix that. But if you do want to put questions, please do pop them in the Q&A, because I can see those and I will pick that up. But hello to Richard from marketing, and thank you, Isabel, for letting us know that the chat is disabled. That makes me feel a lot better and a lot less lonely. Right, where was I? UX. So today I want you to take away from this talk 3 main ideas. And if you listen to or take away nothing else, these are 3 things that I want you to remember from today. The first one is that UX design is much more than just wireframing. Hopefully you kind of got that from the title of the talk, but I'm going to talk a bit about why I think that is and what I mean by that. The second one is that UX design is a process. It's not necessarily a solution, because I think sometimes that is another misconception. And then lastly, but not least, or certainly not least, we're going to talk about how, oh, sorry, this panel thing's just come up, so I can't actually see my own slides. Why is it doing that? There we go. How UX design can be a longer term competitive advantage for your organization. Cool. So UX, idea number 1, much more than just wireframing. Now, when we talk about UX design, and particularly when I speak to clients of ours, it kills me inside when I hear a founder or a business leader talking about that we need to do the UX as if it's this kind of thing that happens at some point in designing a website or designing a product. And often people think about these kind of things. Wireframing, maybe that's working in Figma, creating some web designs, how it's going to work. Maybe you're sketching in a notebook and trying to work out what this digital product is going to look like. And yeah, that is a part of UX design. But what I want to talk about today is thinking about UX more as a mindset for a much wider view of the organization. But to do that, we're going to start with a chap who came up with this. So this is Don Norman. He has an excellent choice in hats. I wish I could pull that off. I'm still working on the beard. But more importantly, he is also the first person to ever have user experience designer as their job title when he joined Apple in 1994, I think it was. Now, Apple already had a really established design team, obviously, around interface design, usability, and all these things we commonly associate with UX. But Don wanted a much wider remit. He wanted a design discipline that looked much more holistically at the experience from the very start of someone, finding out about your brand, about your product, right through to purchasing it, using it, and even end of life and beyond that. So he defined this term, user experience, to try and kind of collate up this cohesive view of the discipline. Now, my favorite example of this at Apple is, to just give it a bit more kind of context, is that they were the first company to start shipping their iPods with a full battery charge. Because at the time, if you ordered an MP3 or a Walkman, the first thing you do when you got that box and you were super excited to start listening to your music was you had to wait 9-12 hours for it to charge. Don, as a UX designer, looked at that experience and said, there's an opportunity to bring in some more delight here or to reduce some friction. And that is really the essence of user experience design. And that's why I think sometimes when we talk about it now, it's very kind of insular and looks at specific kind of screens or pages of a website. But actually, we need to pull that back. And as UX designers, we need to be champions for a much wider picture, which is what the next slide says, which is all about. So thinking about UX being everything from customer support, onboarding, brand, durability. I mean, this is not an exhaustive list, but it gives you an idea. Now, we're probably all sat here thinking, yeah, this sounds great. It all makes sense. We need to think about the customer much more holistically. But the problem is we've got to convince the rest of the business of this as well. So one of the questions I get asked a lot is around how we get the rest of the organization thinking about being more customer-centric rather than just me as an individual. And there are two bits of advice I would give. The first one is that you need to make customers' pain as clear to everyone in the business as possible. People don't react to things unless they can see it very clearly in front of them. And there are lots of ways that you can do this. So you've got to be doing your custom interviews, focus groups, all of those kind of things. But when you do those, take snippets from them, whether that's a recording, whether that's quotes that you can then build into themes and give to people in a really easily digestible format to make sure that the rest of the organization sees the problems that customers are facing using your website, web app, whatever that might be. And then the second thing is to make customers a part of your daily routines. So the best companies that we work with actually have user testing on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. And it doesn't matter what they're working on. Every 2 weeks, they recruit 3 customers to come into the office and they talk to them and they show them what they're working on and they get immediate feedback. And it's that difference in mindset of kind of being, well, we're doing a project, so we need to get some user testing in, to actually being, we need to become a really customer-centric organization. And that will help to sort of get you thinking about that wider picture rather than just working on the product that's kind of immediately in front of you. So that's idea number one. Idea number two, UX design is a process and not a solution. And this is something I'm really passionate about. And again, is a common thing I see with UX design and UX designers. We're often asked, what's the best practice? Or my favorite, should we be copying Amazon because they've spent all this money on A/B testing and UX design and blah, 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 blah. But what I would say to them is that the way we approach UX design as a process, and I am going to talk about what that looks like in a minute, because I know that's the kind of theme of the talk, is that the aim is to have a process which is really good at finding customer insights and things that your competitors haven't noticed or haven't found out about your customers. And then a process for generating lots of ideas and refining that into a solution that works really well for your customers that probably is different from what everyone else is doing because you've got better insight. So the idea is that UX design is not about saying how things should work. It's a process which has a challenge at the start of it, and out the end of that comes a validated customer solution. So how do we do that? Well, there are lots of different ways that you can run a UX design process, but this is the kind of 5 steps that we generally try to go through to solve a problem or create a new solution. The first one is understanding, and that is all about getting out and speaking to your customers. And no matter how many customers you speak to, it's probably not enough. There's always more insight gathered, but there are definitely ways of doing that, like we said, whether that's interviews, whether that's focus groups, but you've got to speak directly to customers. You need to combine that with some quantitative research, well, that's quite hard to say, on that basis to make sure you're looking at things like Google Analytics or Hotjar for things like session recordings, how people are using the product, seeing where they're rage clicking and things are going wrong. And then again, like we were saying earlier, showing that to the rest of the organization as well, because it immediately aligns people around that customer. And once we've understood our problem and the thing that we are trying to solve, we can start coming up with lots of ideas. And this, again, slightly counterintuitively, we always focus on quantity of ideas, not quality at this stage, because again, sort of what we were saying earlier around we don't have the idea. I'm not coming in to prescribe a solution to you. I'm merely just trying to generate as many ideas as possible and then find out which ones the customers or the users are going to resonate the most with. So at this early stage, we run lots of different activities, and I wanted to go into more detail today, and I'm very happy to, if anyone wants to talk a bit more in depth about this process, I'm very happy to help, but lots of activities to try and generate lots of different ideas. So go very broad initially, and then we actually get to do some wireframing because that is still an important part of UX, especially if it's a digital product, where we start to refine those ideas. But the crucial thing is we don't pick one, we pick a few. We pick the ones that we think are most feasible based on insights, stakeholders, all that kind of thing. And then we start user testing that with people to find out which of those potential solutions is the one we think customers are going to resonate the most with. Then we get to do some design as well. So design and what we would call like user interface design is all about adding color and brand and character to that initial set of wireframes, which is probably just sketches or grayscale, low fidelity stuff. And the analogy that I really like to use for this one is that wireframing, if you were building a chair, for example, wireframing would be defining that you've got 4 legs, a seat, a back, maybe some wheels. The design and the UI is about what does that then look like? Is it a big, characterful armchair, or is it more like an office chair and it's black and it's sleek and it's durable materials? And these things give it kind of character and life, which is sort of the brand, but it's also very still related to the usability of that. So we have to think about that. And none of this process is, particularly linear. There is always a case of kind of jumping back to a step and learning about how the color and the brown that we've added might impact the usability or the original intention in the wireframe. So that's an important one to think about. And then the last one, obviously, is that we have to build the product and release it out into the world. And of course, that just puts you back to the start of this process, because then you have to start learning about how that product works in the real world, if it's a new product, or how the new solution to a feature that you've added works. And inevitably, there are challenges that come out of that. Now, hopefully, or there might be a question which I'm going to go to. Hopefully someone is screaming, why are you not testing with users? Well, you have to do that throughout this whole process, which is really, really important. Angela has a question though. So she says, in my experience at the stage of wireframing, a project can be too advanced to easily make changes needed, e.g. legal requirements. Therefore, it seems like early engagement, such as ideation stage, is key, provided the concept is sufficiently clear. What are your thoughts on that? It's a really good question. I think the most important part about why we're so passionate about process for user experience design is because there are so many opinions, such as legal requirements. So your legal team might need to give input on something. It could be an operational concern. Loads of different parties need to be able to feed into that process. But by having a structured process where all of those stakeholders have the opportunity to input on terms of their requirements, their needs, but crucially aligning them on what the user needs, because if those two things are at odds, we need to resolve that early in the process. And I would definitely say that becomes, in terms of these slides, part of kind of 1 and 2. So understanding is as much about understanding customer needs as it is around stakeholder needs, like regulatory requirements, as it is around what the users want. Because if you're putting that into the mix at the early stage, when you're doing that ideation, it's still a part of what we're doing. As the further we move down this process, the more locked into design decisions you become, the more expensive and more difficult it is to change. And that kind of happens even more so as you move into building something. So I think the stat from IBM that I was looking at yesterday is that it costs 4 or 5 times as much to change something once you've noticed it in development compared to whether you noticed it in design. And then if you notice that kind of change that you want to do post kind of go live, it becomes, multiples of 10 in terms of the cost. So definitely front loading those things in terms of this process is really, really important. And as much as we talk about users being the people who are end users of that, you've got lots of different users of a piece of technology, not just the kind of end users. And that becomes an important part of user experience as a whole. I hope that has answered your question, but I can certainly come back to it towards the end if that's helpful. Cool. Idea number 3, third and final one for today, is that a UX-led strategy leads to a long-term competitive advantage. And I'm going to show you with the help of one of our clients, a really exciting company called Muddy Trowel, who are based in London. And they started in April of 2020. And they were a very opportunistic business because they realized that garden centers were closed and that people were sat at home in their gardens wanting to do some gardening, but no way to buy flowers or get them delivered. So they sprung up very quickly and were quite inevitably quite successful. Got a lot of customers and a lot of interest. But as the world starts going back to normal, they realized that if they wanted to stick around and be a business that was going to operate in the long term, they were going to need to differentiate themselves. And they decided to use user experience as a mindset and a strategy for the entire business, not just the design team, to uncover user insights and make themselves a long-term kind of player in the gardening e-commerce space, because yeah, so how do we do that? Well, I think UX delivers the opportunity to drive competitive advantage in 3 stages. So the first one in the short term is that we can improve the way we position our products, the way that we talk about them. So I know there are some marketing people on the call. In theory, this is one of the easiest things that we can do. We can start changing the way we talk about things, the positioning in the marketplace. In the medium term, we can start to improve existing products. So we don't have to necessarily change the product itself, but we can start to improve that. And then in the long term, if we've got really good user insight, we can start to invest in new products and services. And I'm going to show you how Muddy Trowel have gone through that 3-step process to make sure that they could drive long-term competitive advantage. So what we did was we started with user interviews and customer interviews, and we found out something really, really interesting. Most of Muddy Trowel's customers who were buying flowers, pots, and gardening stuff didn't like gardening, which seems quite unusual, but actually it was a fascinating insight, because what these customers wanted was instant impact. They were generally in London, so they wanted instant impact, patio gardening with color that meant that when their friends came around, they had a really beautiful garden that they could enjoy. Were they fussed about digging up flower beds, learning about kind of horticultural terms? No, not at all. And actually, if you look at the existing providers in the marketplace, they all cater to a very green-fingered type person. So there's lots of Latin names, lots of complex instructions on how to plant things. Nobody tells you what kind of soil you've got in your garden and how all that works. And they found that these customers wanted something completely different, which is also why they didn't shop from garden centres. So armed with this insight, we set about on this journey of kind of short, medium, and long term. So in the short term, we immediately changed the positioning of the business. So started talking about how could we deliver joy, impact, colour. Haven't changed the product at all. We're still selling flowers, plants, and pots. And I don't know if you can see that's a little bit small, but the tagline was everything you need to create a beautiful in bloom plant pot or window box delivered to your door. So focus on ease, speed, and ability to kind of just get amazing impact so that you can start taking pictures of Instagram of your friends in your garden. And that worked really well. It sort of tapped into the market that they were already starting to serve, and really helped them define a bit of a niche. So then moving into the medium term, they started to think about their product range and how they could improve them to better serve this customer insight that they'd effectively identified. And what they did was started curating plant kits. So instead of selling all the things they needed for people to plant up at home, they went, well, why don't we just plant up the plots for them? And we could pick the plants that work best together. So we could put those all in one kind of pot for them. So they don't need to think about all the different choices of plants they want. They just say, we like red, or we like the cottage kind of theme. And they put those together as kits, and those are really successful. So you can see how over the medium term, they slightly tweak their products to make them better serve that kind of customer insight that they originally found. But most excitingly, in the long term, and this is present day, so 3 years later, we've launched this year a garden design service, which has been really, really interesting. So again, they looked at the marketplace and noticed that there's a very high-end group of people who want to spend several £1,000s on a garden designer to come in and landscape their garden. That's not particularly accessible for a lot of people. But we know that there's this big group of people who want beautiful gardens, but they don't really want to learn how to do gardening. So for between £30 and £500, it's the 3 ranges they had. Effectively, what Muddy Trowel would do was get you to fill out some information using a bit of technology around preferences. They were then able to create a bespoke planting list for someone's garden based on soil type, sun conditions, doing all this hard work for you, and then sending you all the plants you needed to just quickly create a beautiful garden. And this was really interesting because not only did they generate a whole new revenue stream in terms of selling these design services at an incredibly disruptive price to the main market, they also tripled their basket size compared to someone who was just shopping through the Muddy Trowel e-commerce site generally. Now, for anyone who works in e-commerce, tripling your basket size as a metric is unheard of. That's incredible. We'd be happy with 5-10% increase on that. So the way that they've been able to use that insight, find a customer segment, really understand them, has allowed them to define a completely different business to where all the other kind of online garden centers have gone, and ultimately allow them to be successful, which I think is a real testament to that commitment to learning about the users. And that is pretty much it. So just to kind of round up those 3 ideas that I wanted you to take away from today: UX design, much more than just wireframing. It's about the whole end-to-end journey. It's not a solution, but rather a process to help guide you towards better solutions. And then lastly, but not least, that if you do that, you will generate a business or an organization which has a really long-term competitive advantage against other players in the market. I will take more Q&A. I don't think we managed to get the chat working. Apologies. We'll fix that for next time. But if you do click on the Q&A, I will take some questions in there. While I'm waiting for those to come through, in case there are any, we're running another event, which is not part of Bristol Tech Festival, but is in Bristol. It's at the Engine Shed on November the 7th. If you scan this link here, you will be taken through where you can sign up for that. It's a panel discussion. We've got 3 amazing panelists joining us to talk all about inclusion in innovation. So how do we make the products and services that we create as organizations more inclusive and make sure that they are accessible to everyone? So it promises to be a really fascinating evening of conversation. We've got there's pizza and beer as well, so come along for that if nothing else. We would very much like to see you there. But that's pretty much it. Have we got any more questions? No, a few people are saying thanks, which is much appreciated. But I will stick around for a few more minutes because I can see people are still on the webinar in case people are. Oh yes, we've got a question, right. Richard asks, what are some of the key tools that people are using for UX ideation? Miro, whiteboards, pen and paper? Great question. All of the above, I would say. We're really big fans of pen and paper in the first instance. There's nothing like committing ideas to paper to just let go of the perfectionism element of it, because when you start to work on something like Figma or Miro, for example, you start to get a little bit attached to how it looks. And even if that's at a subconscious level, it can start to make you more attached to an idea because you've put work into it and not because it's a good solution to the problem. So we like to spend a lot of time sketching. We like to sticky notes, get them up on the wall and just work through things. Big fan also of FigJam, which is like Miro. It's effectively like a virtual whiteboard. So we do run workshops from that if it has to be remote, because just the way the world works now, often people aren't based in the same place and it can be very difficult, but they're great tools for to run ideation workshops on and take people through those exercises. So definitely recommend that. Anything else? Yeah, I think that's probably a good answer. I hope that's helped. We have another question from Angela. Who would you say are the key teams and roles, for example, for a client such as this Muddy Trowel example? So, great question. Who are the key teams and roles? So Muddy Trowel was a startup. So in that instance, they're actually quite a small team. They're about 10 people at the moment. which can be an advantage in this setting because it's all about us being as close to the customer, as possible. I think the point I sort of made a bit earlier around getting leadership buy-in for this is incredibly important, because we're not just talking about design here, we're talking about actually the whole organization's strategy towards its products and services. So you're going to need, buy-in from certainly a founder, a CEO if it's a startup, or leadership if it's a larger organization. But in terms of the team that's delivering that, it's everyone should be involved with UX. But you're certainly going to want someone who is championing that. So that could be a product manager, it could be a UX designer. And certainly in our situation when we're working with Muddy Trowel, they had a kind of growth lead who was responsible for looking after the website, the technology, and then we as an agency brought the experience of user experience design, product strategy, and between us, we were doing the user interviews. So talking to customers, figuring stuff out, and then collating those insights together. So yeah, it's wide ranging, but I hope that gives you a flavor. Do we have any more questions? I think that might be it, unless anyone is typing anything in. I'm just going to triple check. Yeah, okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining today. I hope that was helpful. Please do, reach out if there are any further questions that come out of today, or you'd just like to talk about UX, because I could talk about it for days. So feel free to reach out. Hope to see you at the Engine Shed on November the 7th. And if not, have a brilliant Friday, brilliant weekend, and we'll see you soon. Thanks so much. Cheers.